All right, go ahead.
Okay. Well, we want to welcome everybody to the Tuesday, February 9th, 2021, 7:32 p.m. Strategic Planning Committee meeting of the Avon Grove Charter School. So we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. If we can go ahead and recite the mission statement. To inspire passion for lifelong learning, one student at a time. And if we can go ahead and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so it looks like our first agenda item is our meeting minutes review and acceptance. So our meeting minutes were posted on the board doc site. So as far as the approval, Colleen, did you get a chance to review those?
Sorry, yes. I couldn't find the mute button.
Okay. So if we can have a motion to go ahead and approve the strategic planning meeting minutes from the month of
January.
So it'd been January 12th.
So moved.
And I second. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to the next item, which is the 2021-2022 academic calendar draft discussion.
Give me one.
So we brought this up at the last strategic planning meeting. After that meeting, we had a meeting with Quest. And then I also sent out 2 draft calendars to the staff to just get their feedback on what they liked and what they didn't like. They submitted some comments that I brought together. And I'll just share the calendar in a second, but they in the slide decks here, you can we had a 55 to 44, really 56 to 44 split on staff feedback in terms of like a vote, but in favor of version 3 of the calendar. I shared version 3 and version 4, which were the ones that we agreed upon as a group in January that we liked the best, and then was also in discussion at our Quest meeting in January. So I'll reshare that again, just so that I wanted to have a couple points of discussion about it. Tomorrow, one of the feedback points that I received through the survey and from Quest was the idea about trying to continue to do asynchronous days, like independent work days on conference days. That was kind of in line with what school districts are allowed to do for their Act 80 days, where they can have a parent-teacher conference day and it count towards their 180 days of school for students while actually not having students in session. We're not allowed to do that. Our PIMS administrator, Nora Phillips, has a PIMS meeting tomorrow and a child accounting meeting tomorrow where she's going to ask that question of PIMS and the Department of Ed. So I'm hoping to get an answer. My gut tells me the answer is going to be no, unless the governor's state of emergency continues into next year, which very well may happen, but we don't know that yet. So I think that a lot of the questions that are being asked like that right now, the answer is we don't know. So I think that the best way to kind of move forward with still having those question marks hanging out there is operate under the premise that we wouldn't be afforded that flexibility. And then if it comes back that we are able to, we can always vote for a calendar revision later in the spring or even into the summer, knowing that we really wouldn't be messing with the beginning of school and what that looks like for families. It would be really just what the structure of some of our conference days might look like for them, which don't occur till November and March. And then what happens there may impact the final day of school. But that's so far away that I think a calendar revision at that point would be okay. So this was the draft calendar that got the most staff votes, and really the two things to point out are that, and it was a mixed bag, and I think it depends on the perspective of the teacher, whether they're an elementary or they're a secondary teacher with regards to conferences, right? Like our elementary teachers predominantly get more conference requests, whether it's in the fall or in the spring. And in the spring, there's a drastic decline in the volume of conference requests that occur for our secondary teachers. So when you're looking at it, to have school off in March means that it's an additional teacher work day, right? Because you're having conferences, but for every day off you have, that's an additional student day that you have to add in at the end of the year. So I think some feedback from secondary teachers was that we don't get a lot of conferences in the spring, but also half days are kind of, from an academic standpoint, you're just rushing through 30-minute periods and you don't really get much done. So kind of a not a waste, but not as an effective instructional day. But those kind of compete with one another. And so the vote that kind of panned out and where we placed things was to look at having school closed on those days with conference availability and teacher in service, which had the end of the school year coming up on June 9th. Now, version 4 had 2 half days and an in-service day in March, and we ended 1 day earlier. So the trade-off would be on these days, you don't have a day of school where you have students there and then have to transition into that mindset of being with parents for the next 6 or 7 hours of conferences. It allows for a little bit more focus and a little more focused day for the staff. And more daytime availability and morning availability that we did get feedback for the families. That was nice before, to have some morning availability as opposed to just afternoon and evening. The only other thing that we did, and we had talked about this at our meeting in January, it got brought up during Quest, and was that we looked to move the Yom Kippur in-service day, which would have fallen on September 16th, back into October. I believe this year was the only year that we actually had scheduled Yom Kippur as an in-service day, and we actually didn't end up having it because we had virtual school in September, and we moved the in-service day. But if you look at where September 16th falls, you end up having 3 4-day school weeks, the first 3 weeks of school, and probably don't need that much time off the first 3 weeks. So looked at taking that in-service day, and an in-service day on September 16th is relatively close to when we have staff in on the 24th, 25th, and 26th of August, to give a little bit, spread it out a little bit more, allow the staff to get into the rhythm of the school year, and then have an in-service day in October. Also gives them a day without students in October, to kind of refocus and regroup. So we moved that there. So that was, this was the one that garnered the most votes, and really just kind of opening up for any feedback from staff or anybody else here this evening related to this. And with the caveat out there, if we get any information that'll provides us any flexibility from the Department of Ed or from our PIMS accounting meeting, that this could still change slightly, but this would be sort of what we were looking at.
So that means that, the recommendation will go to the board next week to vote on the calendar, and then with a similar discussion like what happened this summer with any revisions that happen after the fact based upon what the governor or any other happenings with the pandemic. So that's sort of our timeline with that, correct?
Yeah, so I would send this out, and with the board agenda, have discussion during the working session, and then potentially vote in the February board meeting.
But we would only share this one calendar. We wouldn't give them all the
Yeah,
options.
we won't do them all.
The one calendar that we would settle on.
Absolutely. Okay.
Hey, Brian.
Yep.
Avon did for their flexible instruction days. They're starting with the 3 days that they have snow days, and then they do flexible instruction. Is there any like pros and cons to either side of that?
Can I get
Because
this
we
one?
start with the FID. Yeah.
So I think that they did that this year because they weren't prepared.
Okay.
As opposed, I don't know if that, from what I gathered, was that wasn't necessarily a policy that they're moving forward with. It was just, hey, this is what we're going to do this year instead, based on where they're at. I can reach out to them and ask if that's what they're going to be doing moving forward.
I think there's pressure from families about playing in the snow. And I think that, some people are taking a stand about playing in the snow versus using these flexible instructional days the way they were intended. Obviously, we didn't do that this year because we have any day that we can go virtual with the schedule. And because parents are already upset with the maximum instructional time and kids learning, giving them more asynchronous work is not necessarily what we thought was in the best interest of kids. We thought giving them their routine and their day and still getting them time to play in the snow was enough. And so, and I don't know anybody that really can't play in the snow after a day of virtual online. Even the 2-hour delay that we just had, Avon Grove was on a 2-hour delay in a half day. So they only went to school for not even 2 hours. And then Oxford didn't have school at all. So for us to do that with no transportation or a limited transportation, our kids get maximum amount of time being in school online. So I know there's a big debate among parents. And I think that school districts are either settling with some of that, but I think our intention is to give kids as much consistency as possible and learning time and still giving them time. Now, do I think next year, if we don't have all these asynchronous days or Wednesdays or synchronous days or blue group, and it's 5 days a week of school and the first snowstorm comes and teachers want to give more asynchronous work, will that be a big deal? Probably not. But right now with what we're dealing with, I think it's a big deal. Any kind of loss of time is a big deal, and still giving kids time to play in the snow. So I just think it's the year of what we're doing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I guess in a kind of a follow-up to that question, I know next year we definitely have just the 5 FID days, right? Like there's no more than that. So if we went into like 6 or 7, then it adds on to the end of the year or whatever.
Correct.
Is that the same as this year? Like, or is there like some policy this year through the state that says it doesn't matter how many flexible instruction days?
There
or do we
is
still get the 5?
Yeah,
So,
there really isn't a flexible instructional day because every day can be flexible.
So this year, does that not count? Like,
so I don't think anybody's gotten real good guidance on this, because the flexible instructional day application was for flexibility when you have a weather emergency or pipe bursts at your school, right? And even our flexible instructional day application that was submitted stated that it was predominantly going to be asynchronous work and that we were going to run a 2-hour delay schedule because it might be a weather emergency and people are trying to figure out what to do in the morning. So it did leverage some of the ways that we can look at a school day and realize that it's for a snow emergency. I think what's unique with this year is, and what we took was the governor's state of emergency declaration and the school calendar reporting that we had to do that basically allowed remote instructional minutes to count towards your 180 days or the 990, 900 hours that you need. So it's almost like technically we're not really utilizing flexible instructional days. We're just providing remote instruction on those days. and looking at it as a full day of school, like we do Wednesdays, or like we would do if we had to close for a COVID outbreak. We looked at that. Yeah, we looked at it as it didn't really state that instructional minutes or running a hybrid schedule where we have 50% of our kids remote 2 days a week, or some 100%. Like we looked at that flexibility as allowing us to have synchronous instructional days when weather happened, because whether it's weather, whether it's COVID, whatever it is, that state of emergency kind of gave us flexibility there, as opposed to looking at it from a FID application day type scenario. Moving into next year, that's where I was saying, if we don't have that emergency declaration extended, if it's like a normal school year in terms of child accounting,
then we go with the application,
and you would have to go with you'd have to do your FID day application that was approved and what that looks like, and you would only have 5. Now you do see some schools say we're gonna have 2 snow days the first 2 days of the year and then use FID days after that. I mean, some schools have built-in snow days. I think where we've always had our mantra was, it's hot in June, and there's large portions of our buildings that don't have adequate air conditioning, right? So if we can exercise FID days on the front end and try not to have an extension of the school year to the greatest extent possible, that would be sort of what we went first. If we had, comfortable air conditioning and 68-degree classrooms across everything, I think the conversation's a little bit different.
And I think at the end of the year, kids are disengaged and they're ready to be done. Not that I don't think playing in the snow is important. I do think playing in the snow is important when kids have their first snowstorm. But I think right now with the—
We're also out at 2:15.
Yeah, kids can do both. They can still play in the snow and learn some.
I would say though, just as a side note, that if all the sending school districts all are using a few snow days first and then doing FID, and we're the only ones starting with FID and then going to snow days, like, I just think that
we should stick with it.
Yeah, and I think it depends. I mean, you get into a scenario where, just like with what happened, everybody 2-hour delayed except for Oxford, right? Like, so when they start to do things that are different, it's hard to stay consistent across 7 or 8 different sending school districts.
Look what's happening right now. Some people are in school, some people aren't in school. I mean, everybody's doing something different right now, just with COVID. So, I mean, we're really making we're trying to get as much instructional time into a school day. That's how we're making the decision.
Okay, thanks.
So so that was where we landed with this. We played a little bit more, but kind of kept coming back to the feedback that we received and then the original draft proposals. Any other questions
or feedback? I mean, I'm
this kept us at 180 days, which is what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I have one question, and it follows up on the snow days. I like the schedule. Thanks for explaining all the little whole days for conferences. That all makes sense. So the only other thing I thought about as I watched, Facebook blow up in forum with people's complaints about snow days was, what if we had a 2-hour delay virtual day where I know I've always been miffed by 2-hour delays because the classes are so short, but the transition times are so different online. They go so quickly, and you can do a lot with a half-hour class. And I just wonder if that would kind of quell the whole outrage that people have, because you could still shovel out your driveway and get the rest of your family going.
So Bonnie, the reason why we didn't do that is because then the interventionist schedule was all disrupted. And there was still flexibility in the schedule that if teachers needed to shovel a driveway, that's why I wrote that email. They could
Yeah.
still start a class, then have kids do some asynchronous work and go shovel their driveway and come back to the next one. So we left that open for them to have some flexibility in the schedule without disrupting everybody else, like the interventionists.
We
Yeah,
also
gotcha.
talked about like moving forward, if with trying to have as much direct instruction happening, like if that was a call that would have happened in the you get my phone call at 5 a.m.
Yeah,
If or later, if we didn't do that, like how much time were we giving staff to also prepare, redo Zoom links that were reoccurring? Like there was,
No,
we tried to think about some of the operational and logistical things on your guys' end.
yeah, that's true. Yep.
Just
That makes a lot. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that the confusion it could cause would cause some kids to voluntarily not come to class too.
right.
Yeah.
If it was a synchronous learning day. Now, if it was more of that just prep and pre-prepared work, like that's why we wrote that FID application that way, so that if in a normal school year we're going to school 5 days a week and all of a sudden I call at 5 a.m. and say, hey, we're having a FID day, you as the teacher might not be prepared for that in terms of providing remote instruction or asynchronous work, because it could be spur of the moment. So that's why we wrote in that 2-hour delay schedule to give staff time in the morning, basically from like 7:15 to 9:15, to do work and prepare for the day.
Yeah.
So that was purposeful.
Gotcha.
And in the
Okay.
meantime, with the snow possibly this week, I'm writing another letter to the parents, or we're in the midst of writing another letter to explain some of these things again, of why the decisions are being made that are being made.
Yeah. What a nightmare.
Kristen, I think that I give you a lot of credit, I guess, for explaining again, because I feel like we're never going to make everybody happy. That's never going to happen, as you guys everybody well knows from this year. But I just think that it is what it is. We're trying to get as much instruction as we can, and the snow's falling when it's falling, and it is what it is, and that's nobody's fault. And everybody's doing the best they can. The teachers are doing the best they can. The parents are doing the best they can. And I just think that it's going to snow or it's not going to snow, and there's nothing we can do about that. So
I love that.
It's just,
yep, I hear you.
we're just trying to get these kids, trying to get the kids and the teachers and everybody through the year, and we're doing that. So I think let's look at this. I'm excited for this calendar, for everybody to be there all the days.
Us too. Yes. let's celebrate the possibility of that.
Oh man.
And I think Bonnie shared the kids are doing great. That's what's important. And then I think I think it does, offering some discussions does help people, helps to understand. I know the big question was, well, why can't you just, the kids in the blue cohort are getting gypped. Well, again, there's not the ability to change a hybrid schedule. There's intentionality with the Wednesday and the cleaning schedule, and they're critical points of how we can continue to stay in school. So I think I think that helps for people who just don't understand. So I appreciate the time, even on the forums where it's posted, because I think that is a place where people go.
I think the most frustrating part for me is hearing another day off for the blue cohort. Like, it's not a day off. It's a full day of learning. And I think, and there's work to be done. And I think we're trying to get the other message across, that instruction is important to us, and giving them time for learning is important to us. So even if they're not physically in the school, doesn't mean that learning's not happening. And when that mentality of it's a day off, if that's what's happening at home, then that's what the kids feel like it is. And then they're not showing up. And so I think it's important for parents to recognize it is not a day off. It is time to learn.
You just got to change your vocabulary.
That's right.
It would be interesting for them to hear what teachers are going through when those changes are happening, because a lot of planning switches, and so that it is a learning day. I think people would be surprised that it's not a day off at all. It's a massive shift, and trying to readapt to those kids not being in the building that day. So yeah, must be frustrating.
All right, any other points on this, and we can move on to the next. All right, I will I'll follow up with the board on that draft, as well as with all of you on any information we get back tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow, related to flexibility for conference days going into next year. So the other part of tonight that I wanted to talk about was just was sort of beginning to transit. And I know this meeting, this kind of group ends up having to be like the catch-all for everything that needs to be talked about, right? So we have strategic planning for calendars and things that we need to do just out of normal operations. We have COVID-related planning and discussion that ends up needing to happen periodically. And then there is the point that we have our comp plan and strategic plan that's due this year. It's due by November. It can be submitted as early as March and begins July 1 of this summer, just from a planning standpoint. So I wanted to go back. So our current comp plan ends this June. So I kind of wanted to take a couple moments just to look back on some of the things that were in that and that we did. And I think it's important that we, and one thing I think we probably need to do a better job of is continually pointing back to these things. I think that we've had discussions over the last 3 or 4 years, and I know I have even with staff members, and it's like, well, why did we do this? And I'm like, well, it's in our comp plan. Like we worked on this, we wrote this, these were goals that we had. Like we're kind of following a roadmap of things. Like, for example, the establish a K-12 grading and homework committee and a policy was something that we wrote 4 years ago that we wanted to try to do. And that was something that the upper school had been working on over the last 2 years. So we're methodical about these things to the best that we can be in looking forward when we're building these plans and saying, okay, what are the things we want to focus on and make a priority over the next 3, 4, and 5 years to devote both, human capital and money and time to. So in our current comp plan, it's a little bit different this year, but our goal statement was to ensure there's a system within the school that fully ensures consistent implementation of a curriculum framework. So we were looking at establishing curriculum mapping, which we had started, and it's still going through. Our ELA departments are working on that this year. Common assessments, which predominantly was worked on in our elementary grade levels, that were developing common assessments in ELA and math. Curriculum oversight and accountability, that was built into our curriculum cycle that the board approved probably 2 years ago, which was basically what we were doing each year to make sure that one curriculum was being written, and then after it was written, how are we going back on a continuous cycle for oversight and accountability to make sure it's being followed and implemented with fidelity. And then there was the K-12 grading and homework policy. So, and that is in year. I guess Beth Ann, it's considered year 2, right?
Yeah, it is considered year 2.
Okay, so in year 2, it was the first year of the launch, but second year of planning, and we'll continue to have additional pieces added to it. To again, the goal was to make a policy that was equitable. So the green items were ones that we kind of went through, and we actually had done this exercise when we were preparing for our comp plan, which was supposed to be due last year, but then we got an extension. So these green ones were ones that we had done. Unhighlighted ones were ones that were kind of still in the middle of. So it doesn't mean that it's not done. It just means it's one that sort of is ongoing. So kind of checked off the it had the ability to check off the majority of the strategies and implementation steps that we came up with to say that we were going to try to meet goal 1. Any questions about anything there? All right, goal 2 was worded very similarly, but had to deal with not with curriculum, but with effective instructional practices that meet the needs of all students across all classrooms. So we talked about technology and student achievement, instructional time and campus schedules, and then working to try to develop some online learning opportunities for students. And again, these strategies were written like 4 years ago.
We killed that one this year.
The online learn. Well, we were kind of forced to. So ones in green were ones that we were able to check off that we had done. Strike throughs were ones that we ended up actually as a committee and a group taking off as we were going through it. It kind of just the way that we kind of morphed through the implementation steps, we said that we didn't really need this. And red was one that we just didn't do. We had on here that we were going to do basically a technology integration committee through the board, and had a discussion that would kind of just fall under strategic planning, like everything else. So we ended up not doing that. But one that I know I have been talking about, and we took a stab at it again with the campus schedule. I think that looking at this year, it's even more important to have a discussion again. I know Marie was there for that day or those 2 days of really needing to look at our secondary schedule and our 8-period 45-minute blitz and how to better leverage some of our time, particularly at the secondary level. We had met, was that 2 years ago now?
I think so. I think it was 2 years ago.
2 years ago, and tried to do the exercise, and it basically came back that it's possible to look at some type of block scheduling and longer instructional period time, but would take additional staff and space. I think that during this next strategic plan, I think it's worth looking at again. And I don't know, I think teachers, if you're on here, I know there's a lot of secondary ones with looking at transition times now and how we're learning and how things are going. I don't see how not needing more focused time with students, particularly over the next 3 to 4 years, as you're seeing some of the elementary students that are going to be coming up into our secondary grade levels, and go from and whatever work we need to do to make sure that any type of learning gaps are closed over the next couple years. Doing that in 45-minute periods is I think is always just difficult as a teacher.
I'm a huge proponent of block scheduling. I love block scheduling, but I'm a lab scientist, so that makes total sense to me. I know that. Have you ever looked at the kind of schedule that I hate going back to Avongrove, but my daughter's there and I see how they do things. That 6-day cycle program that they have, or maybe 8-day cycle, where they have some block scheduling, but then also some 45-minute scheduling.
Yeah, so the drop block period is really hard for us to do because we have crossover specialists. So as you know, so like take Dan Kelly, he teaches 8th grade, 7th grade gym, but also 4th, 5th, and 6th grade gym. If we had like 8th grade gym starting to rotate, it would end up conflicting with when he has 4th grade PE. Yeah. So the rotating drop block is difficult to run. I think
it's more difficult than a regular block scheduling.
No, yeah, more difficult. I think if we put some time and effort, and I don't want to get into the weeds, put some time and effort into really looking at an AB block for our secondary group and making that work with Sharon's schedule for 4 to 6, and how our lunch periods are running. It would take some additional staff, but or repurposing some staff, maybe better said that way. but something to look into the next comp plan. And the next one was about safe and supportive learning environments, which really had been a major focus of the school over the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 years, with our student services group and our MTSS model that was implemented, and Ryan and the counselors PBIS programs, our diversity training that happened, the summer camps and before and after school program that we brought in-house. We spent a lot of time in this area revamping our interventions and the model in which we try to provide support to some of our learners who need something extra. So again, the only thing that we didn't do on this one was actually develop like a hard catalog of club and after school and sort of community activities that were available for kids. Anything on that one? All right. So we had started building our comprehensive plan last year, and then they stopped it and gave us an extension. So some of the work that we're going to go into is already done. And this was something that we had already sort of developed going into what we were trying to build as sort of a bridge plan, and then into our comp plan. So we were looking at trying to build a 4 to 5 year plan that sort of had these larger buckets. It was about building our brand, rigorous teaching and learning, support for all learners, championing community, modernizing our facilities and systems, and then fiscal and human responsibility. So basically that we would say these are our 6 pillars or areas of focus for our strategic plan. And then even things outside of our strategic plan, anything that we say we value or that we want to devote time and attention to should really fall into one of these areas. And then our community and our teachers and our parents and our board can see that, hey, when we are coming and asking for money, or we want to launch a program or something, we have to make sure that it's aligned within one of these pillars. And then underneath these would be a portion of it would be our comprehensive plan. So you kind of look at it as our larger strategic plan we're looking at something a little bit more robust, and where we may add in things that occur over the next 5 years. And our strategic plan or comprehensive plan is really only like 2 of the things that we're going to focus on over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's more for a state reporting requirement. They don't want to see like 50 things. They want to see 2 or 3 that you're really going to look at. And that's focused on data that came from our Future Ready Index and is tied to student learning. They don't want to see that we're starting to have conversations about what our next building project is for the 400 and 300 and 400 modulars. Like, that's not what our comprehensive plan has to, they want to see more student learning outcome related initiatives. So this was kind of like the area that we were proposing before to operate under before COVID sort of hit. And I think it's applicable moving forward and really hits all aspects of the school, even, Tasha and human resources, and, what are we going to do to recruit and retain quality staff and teachers, and Donna is in terms of fiscal management, our facilities department, and Ian, setting their own goals and working on their 3, 5, and 10-year plan for our facilities and our systems. So you can kind of see it all tied together. So this was sort of the draft vision, I guess, that we were looking to move forward with, and thought that most of our operations and future could fall under these. Any feedback, ideas, things I might have that we might have missed in this? No, this is really high level, and it's more the nitty gritty that we're interested in, I'm assuming. So I had on the agenda that I had on our timeline that at the next meeting, we would actually look over this. And I moved it to tonight if we had more time, with it already being 8:15. I don't know if we really want to get into this, as it was originally on our timeline for next week, but it was all of the performance and assessment analysis that we had to do based on our last batch of PVOS, PSSA, and Keystone data, and all of our future ready index data that you have to do as part of the comprehensive plan. And then basically the items, the action plans that you build in the comprehensive plan are supposed to tie back to challenges that you've identified through this performance and assessment analysis. So it's a little lengthy, and I didn't know if we would have time tonight. I don't want to really get into it. And I think for our next meeting, I'll send this out ahead of time so that it can be reviewed ahead of time. And then we can have sort of a brief discussion around the challenges that were included in here, along with, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. We did a number of surveys last year with our parents, our staff, and the students around the essential practices for schools, which we had to evaluate ourselves against, and we brought the data together and sort of went through and rated ourselves based on the numerical data, whether we were emerging, operational, or exemplary, based on that feedback. So I think that area is kind of what's will drive our strengths and our challenge areas for the next strategic plan related to the portion that'll be submitted to the state for the comp plan. If that's fair. I don't want to keep everybody's time on a school night, even though we're all virtual and in our basements and living rooms.
I do think when we start talking about assessments, the next couple of years are going to be really interesting because of COVID. And so what we would have answered last year and before COVID and what we're going to answer now might be very different in how we're going to tackle some of our comprehensive plan for the next 5 years. So I think it will be interesting to see how different our conversations are.
When is that sort of those markers, Brian, that you had up, like based on the testing? When are those tests? When is that testing from now?
18-19.
18-19, yeah.
Okay. So we sort of, yeah. So it's.
And they haven't heard anything still yet. I mean, I got something from John Lawrence about testing, and they went back up again and nothing's gone through. I know that everybody's pushing really hard to get answers on whether they're going to have testing this year. I just can't imagine how they're going to do that, but they're not moving very quickly on making a decision. So I'll be interested to see what happens.
I don't know how some Philadelphia school district still isn't even in session. So, I mean, how are they going to hold the PSSAs?
Yeah.
And it's an equity issue. It's an equity issue across the board. How do you securely do when you have students virtual? And I don't know how you can utilize the data. It's an incomplete data set.
But 2 years of missing data is going to be really difficult.
Huge.
It is.
And I'll be honest with you, and I'm not trying to discourage teachers in this conversation at all, but we are benchmarking, and there are some schools that aren't benchmarking, and we are. And the benchmarking is not great. And I think, there's a lot of variety of reasons why that might be and why things are happening. And so we really need to digest some of that. And we're trying to use the next 4 months to address some of it, but we're still in a pandemic and we're still trying to make this work. So I think this is going to be an endless conversation for us for the next 5 years for sure in our comprehensive plan, is what I'm saying. There's not going to be the answers, and what we've had on that paper pre-March is so drastically different.
I have to say too that I think I almost appreciate it in a way that they're dragging their feet and taking their time, because I think as soon as we tell students and families that there is no state testing, that the already relaxed attitude and approach to school that that some students are carrying, it may just snowball into an even larger, I don't have to worry about it this year, walk away type of attitude. So in a small way, I can kind of see the delay and the dragging of feet as a bit of a pro or a plus.
Yeah. We're even seeing in some of the data, like kids that pre-March from last year drastically scoring higher because it's evident that they're getting some help at home. So even some of the tests that they can't do at school that they're doing online, you're seeing some of that and you're like, there's no way the score went from, basic to proficient and it was low below basic. Like it's really telling. You can tell where some support is happening. And so that's really hard to navigate through too.
I agree with you, Marie. I feel like I just keep telling my kids, well, you're going to have your keystone, so keep going, keep trucking.
Yeah.
It's a graduation requirement. That's what I keep saying.
I just wish that that wasn't a motivator for kids to do well and want to do well. That it shouldn't matter about the test, you know what I mean? And that's what, I hope we can come up with another way to really motivate them to just learn.
I agree. And I'm very fortunate that I'm no longer in one of the tested subject areas. Like my department isn't tested. But I see the fret and the stress on some of their faces. If they're frustrated and they know I can do Algebra 1, they'll ask for help, and the keystone looms for them. Like they worry about it. They do.
Well, again, I don't have anything else to add tonight, unless there's any other off agenda topics that need to be discussed or brought up, and then we can I'll follow up with the calendar. I'll resend out that this document so that everybody can look over it before the next meeting, and then have a little bit more of a move forward on some of the items that we would add as actual strategies to include within this larger system.
All right.
Stacy, when you're finished, can you and Colleen stay on for 1 second?
Sure, absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and close out our meeting. So our next meeting will be in March, and it's the second Tuesday in March. So let me just verify that date.
Nice.
So we'll be meeting on Tuesday, March the 9th at 7:30. Brian, do we have any public comment for the Strategic Planning Committee?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
All right, then I'm going to go ahead and
hey guys, make sure, is that going to be night conferences for anybody? Because isn't that parent teacher conferences?
That's a very good call, Marie. Yes, that's going to be the night. That Tuesday is what we are planning on being our later night.
For elementary or for all of us?
Everybody, K to 12.
Okay, then I think we need to make a recommendation to move the meeting. Is there an option? Is Tuesday the best for this group of people? If we push it to the first Tuesday of the month, which is the 2nd, is that better for people, or to push it the week following the board meeting, which would be March 23rd? Is there a preference?
Brian,
when is spring break? Isn't spring break right around there too?
Spring break's the spring break's not on a Tuesday.
Spring break's the following week.
It's like Thursday, Friday, Monday.
I would suggest the 23rd. Gives a little more time to get some things together. And then March 2nd, that week, is when we're doing enrollment, and we're going to release are projected to release the next learning intention form, which may have some other information on it that we may want to discuss at the strategic planning meeting, and we can do that at the end of March.
Okay, then we'll look at rescheduling the meeting for Tuesday, March the 23rd at 7:30 p.m. And yeah, we'll go ahead and just make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All right, I second. And thanks everybody for attending. We appreciate it.
Have a good night.